I was working sales at a cemetery, and part of my job was locking up the mausoleum at night. One evening, I was walking through the quiet rows, making sure no families were inside before closing. The place felt colder than usual. The sun had just set, and the shadows deepened quickly. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, a scratching sound. It wasn't soft or random. It was sharp, deliberate, like claws scraping stone. I froze. My heart shot into my throat. I didn't want to look back. It vanished as fast as it came. Still, I bolted like a scared kid, skipping the slower, calm check I wanted to do. For the next 3 days, I couldn't shake that sound from my head. The mausoleum was quiet, too quiet. I kept checking over my shoulder, half expecting it to happen again. Then, on the third evening around 7:30, I was passing by one of the older grave sites near the edge of the property. That's when I saw her. There was a woman sitting beside a headstone, barely moving. Her clothes were dark and loose, and her hair was tangled. She was scratching the earth next to the stone, nails digging into the dirt like she was trying to claw something out. I stopped dead, watching. Something about her didn't feel right. She looked almost too still, like she wasn't aware I was there. I called out, but my voice caught in my throat. She didn't respond. The scratching kept going, slow, steady, and the sound felt heavier than before, like it was pulling the ground open. I felt the air shift, heavier and thick, like the night was holding a secret it wasn't ready to share. I wanted to walk away, but I couldn't stop staring. Just then, the wind picked up. Leaves scattered. The woman looked up, and her eyes were hollow. She didn't blink. She stood slowly and disappeared behind the trees, like she was never there. I left faster than before, heart slamming against my ribs. Since then, every time I walk past that graveyard at dusk, I hear that scratching again. Soft, urgent, impossible to ignore. I don't know who she was or what she wanted, but something tells me the earth around that grave isn't as still as it seems. Sometimes I wonder if the claws are still scraping beneath the surface, waiting for someone to listen. The graveyard was mostly quiet during my shifts. Nothing strange, just the usual routines. Flowers, faded headstones, the soft creak of old trees. All pretty normal, except for one morning when I found the rabbit head. It was perched right on top of a grave, perfectly clean. Not a speck of blood, not a bit of the body or any entrails, like someone had cut it and set it there on purpose. I'd seen hawks go after rabbits before, but this was different. Too neat, too deliberate. The eyes were still open, glinting flat in the early sun. I crouched there, half thinking maybe I'd find the rest of it nearby, but the earth was untouched. No signs of a struggle, just that smooth, pale head, staring up at nothing. I picked it up with a shovel, telling myself it had to be an animal, but I didn't like how clean it all was. A couple weeks later, some of the older guys at the yard told me about something even weirder from before I started. Grave workers get superstitious, and they weren't shy about the stories. They said once, early in the morning, they'd found a strange bag perched on a headstone. It looked like burlap, soaked through and stained. Inside was a small glass jar plugged with mud, a bent dollar bill, and a doll the size of a fist. The doll was hand-stitched, little bits of red thread showing at the seams, and it was filled with pins. A couple of them were rusted. The stuffing had gone grey and matted from the rain. They said the whole kit stank like sour leaves. No one wanted to open the jar, but someone did, and a thick dark goop oozed out. Nobody wanted to touch any of it with their bare hands. Still, someone had to clean it up. The older guy who did the actual tossing looked different for weeks after, like he left a part of himself in that cemetery. Even now, I sometimes spot little offerings on the stones. Coins, marbles, folded slips of paper. Most are harmless, but every so often, I catch sight of fresh soil disturbed in odd shapes. Sometimes the crows sit just above the newer graves and don't move, no matter how close you get. On some nights, I walk the rows and find the air feels heavy, a strange charge buzzing under my skin. I brush it off, but sometimes I remember that rabbit's head. Clean, facing skyward, like it was meant for someone, or something, else to find. And I never looked too closely at the things left behind. I worked for the county cemetery department years ago, mostly doing upkeep, mowing grass, clearing brush, things like that. One day, we got a tip from a farmer about some old headstones he'd found while clearing a path through a thick stand of trees. When we showed up, it didn't look like much at first, just a few stones barely sticking out of the dirt. We started probing the ground with dowel rods, trying to find where the rest might be buried. What we uncovered was the oldest cemetery in the county, dating back to the 1700s. But that was only the beginning of the story. After checking some of the names and digging into local records, it turned out that before the cemetery existed, there had been a small schoolhouse there. The school was run by a husband and wife, teachers, but some kind of tragedy had wiped them and all their students out. The stories we found were hazy, seemed like some disease or infection had taken hold. They were quarantined inside, no one left alive. Later, the school was torn down, and all of them were buried right beneath where the building once stood. It's just dirt and stones now, but something about it felt off. When I first walked that old cemetery, the air was heavy and thick, like the world was holding its breath. I kept hearing faint noises, soft footsteps on dried leaves, what sounded like whispering, but when I turned, there was nothing but empty trees swaying. The shadows seemed deeper there, almost alive. Creepiest of all was the silence. Not the peaceful kind you get in a forest. This was a dead silence, heavier, like the ground was pressing down on the sounds of life. The soil was colder than anywhere else on property, even in the middle of summer. I swear, sometimes I'd see something in the corner of my eye, shapes that darted between the trees just out of sight, pale and still. Once, I heard the faint, confused voice of a child calling for a teacher. But there was no one around, no birds sang, no insects buzzed, just that hollow call that faded too quickly. We re-established the cemetery and placed new markers. But at the end of the day, when the sun started to dip, I wouldn't hang around. There's something restless beneath that dirt, something that doesn't want to be disturbed. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I hear tiny footsteps pacing over the leaves and a faint knock that echoes through the empty woods. Nobody else talks about it. But I don't think this ground will ever be quiet again. My dad bought the cemetery when I was in middle school. I worked there all through high school, mostly yard work, mowing, weed eating, flower beds. The place was mostly quiet, peaceful even, though sometimes you'd catch movement out of the corner of your eye. Shadows that weren't there. Strange noises that made the hairs on your neck stand up. Nothing we could explain. But the crypts, that was a whole different kind of silence. When there was a burial, we had to dig down 5 feet or so to open the giant steel doors of the crypt. The doors were heavy, cold, and grimy from years of being closed. When you pulled them open, the smell hit you first. Earthy, stale, like a tomb untouched for decades. Inside, the rooms were just big enough for 2 coffins or dozens of little urns stacked on metal shelves. Back in the 50s and 60s, families would cram entire generations in those tiny spaces. Some left candles, old photos, flowers, little trinkets. Some candles were melted long ago. Wax pooled and hardened over dusty pictures. It felt like stepping into someone's forgotten life. I remember the first time I dropped down into one of those crypts. The cold bit into my skin. The concrete floor was rough under my boots. You realize quick that you're at the same level as people who have been dead for decades, maybe longer. Surrounded, really. Just a thin layer of earth above you. It's not just the quiet that's heavy. Sometimes you catch a scrape, a faint shifting sound like something trying to move under the walls. I swear I heard whispers once, soft murmurs that stopped the second I froze and listened. My flashlight flickered and dimmed like it wanted to die. After that, I didn't like going down there alone. But on the worst days, you don't get a choice. One afternoon, I opened a crypt my dad asked me to check. The doors scraped as they slid open, and inside, years of candles had melted into strange shapes across the floor. A faded photo dangled from a cracked frame, yellowed with time, of a family I'd never met. I stepped down, my boots echoing in the small room. Then I felt it. A cold breath brushed past my neck. I spun, flashlight swinging wildly, but nothing was there. The air grew thick, like someone was waiting just out of sight. The door scraped as if pushed from the inside. I didn't wait. I climbed out fast, slamming the heavy doors shut behind me. Since then, I keep the crypt keys in my pocket. Sometimes I swear I hear scratching beneath the soil, right where the crypts lie. The earth never fully settles. It's like it wants something out. And every time I close those doors, I wonder if what's inside ever really stays closed. I worked for a graveyard in Florida for a couple of months. One afternoon, the crew dug a grave but left early, leaving the excavator parked right where it was. I was on my lunch break, sitting near the machine, just zoning out. Then I heard it. Like someone was taking a hammer and banging hard against the metal. At first, I thought it was just settling, or maybe some animal, but no. This was loud, regular, definitely someone beating on that excavator. I sat there for a few minutes, uncomfortable but curious. The banging didn't stop. After about 7 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and slowly walked over. Every step made my heart beat faster. When I got close, the noise just stopped, dead silent. I looked all around. No one, no footprints, no tools, nothing. The machine sat there like a statue under the harsh sun, quiet and still. I waited a bit, expecting the banging to start again, but it didn't. I left feeling twitchy, like something was watching me. I live just down the street from that graveyard now, so I pass by it a lot. One night, I was driving home late and saw a woman walking among the graves. She was just there alone, wandering slow and calm, like she didn't belong to this world. I slowed down to get a better look, but she disappeared behind a tree before I could really see her face. I'm not sure if it was a person or something else, but it freaked me out worse than that banging ever did. Sometimes, when I'm near that graveyard, I swear I hear the hollow thudding again, like the machine being hammered softly, far away. But it stops if I look too long, like it knows I'm watching. I've told a few friends, but no one believes me. Even now, I avoid that part of the yard after dark. Whatever's there doesn't want to be disturbed or seen. And if it can make noise with an empty machine, who knows what else it can do. The funeral home is cold after hours. Lights hum and dim, shadows dragging across empty carpet. I'm cleaning up after a visitation, picking up cups, folding chairs, trying not to listen to the silence. It's late, sometime after 9. I want to finish quickly and leave. I'm stacking programs when something moves in my side vision. A man, grey suit, standing near the casket. He looks lost. I don't want to startle him, so I call out, "Sir? We're closing now. Can I help you?" My words sound too loud. He doesn't react, just keeps drifting between the chairs. His steps are slow, as if the air itself is thick. I go into the room. The temperature drops. All I hear is the clock by the door and the buzzing lights overhead. The man stops, hands clasped in front of him. He's shaking a little. For some reason, I just stand there, watching, too nervous to move closer. He disappears, not leaving, not turning, just gone. Only me and the faint imprint his shoes left in the plush rug remain. The air suddenly smells like cologne, sharp and old. I stumble back to the office. The others see I'm pale. The boss pulls out the family photo wall, silent, waiting. I scan the photos, jittery, hand sweating. My finger hovers over a picture. That's him. The boss nods, jaw tight. His father, the last funeral director, dead only a month. Nobody speaks. In the morning, the casket's lid sits slightly open. I close it without thinking, but the next night it's open again. I ask the others, but they leave it alone. Each night I'm alone, I hear steps on the hallway carpet. Sometimes, just as I lock up, a cold handprint appears in the dusty glass of the viewing room door. It's always gone by morning. The cologne lingers long after I've left. I don't turn around anymore. There's a road in the old cemetery that everyone avoids after dark. It twists down into the trees, but nothing ever moves there. No animals, no wind, just a deep, pressing silence. The first time I tried, I rolled a plastic bottle down the slope and watched it creep back up, slow and steady, as if something underneath was dragging it against the laws of gravity. I tried a stone too. Same thing. Up, not down. The place chills you the second you step on it. Air thick, heavy, like it's hard to breathe. If you wait long enough, you catch odd little details. Shadows that bend the wrong way, headlights faltering as cars pass. Long stretches of quiet broken only by soft, whispery sounds. I once leaned in and thought I heard names, warnings, drifting on the breeze. People in town whisper stories about the dead there, how they never rest easy. Some claim to see figures moving between headstones on nights the moon is thin. The last time I stood at that spot, I felt a cold touch brush my ankle. No animal, no wind, just empty ground and that strange force pulling things upward. I left quick, glancing over my shoulder. The bottle still stopped beside a cracked headstone halfway up the slope. Since then, I haven't set foot on that road. Sometimes, passing by, I still see small things rolling the wrong way, and I imagine something below is reaching up, waiting for anyone foolish enough to linger. I dug graves for 6 months, mostly at cemeteries, so old the markers leaned over at crazy angles and the grass grew thicker than a rug. That day was hot, sticky in a way that made sweat stick to your arms, and we couldn't use the backhoe. Too many ancient plots. The ground was dense with tangled roots and memories nobody wanted to remember. We had to dig by hand. By evening, my shoulders ached and my palms were raw. Dusk settled in, dulling the edges of everything. We worked slower, barely speaking, just the thud of shovels and dirt. When you dig in those places, you feel watched, even if there's nobody around. I hit something hard, not bone. Brick. An old plot border, brittle and covered in black soil. I knocked a brick loose and it slipped down, leaving a gap. For a moment, I caught a whiff of something sour and cold that didn't belong. I stared into the hole, using my phone's flashlight. There was darkness, dull and deep. And then, I'm sure it wasn't just the shadows, something shifted inside. Not an animal, not a trick of the light. It was slow, deliberate, like a hand repositioning after a long sleep. I scrambled out. My boot got caught on the ladder and I almost tipped into the pile of wet clay. My partner looked at me funny, but didn't say a word. The hole stared back, mouth gaping, quiet as stone, and I thought I saw the edge of something bone pale just inside. I forced myself back down once my pulse calmed. The air in the grave was thick. I shoveled faster, glancing at the hole, waiting for it to move again. It never did, not while I was looking anyway. But I never shook the feeling something was waiting there, patient. We filled the grave, packed down the dirt, and left before the moon rose too high. The next morning, I checked on the site. All was smooth, new dirt, neat edges, but one brick from the old border sat on top of the earth. Mud still clung to it like a palm print. The rest of the week, I worked faster than ever. Every night, I'd dream of shoveling in the dark and a cold hand reaching for mine from the place I'd left open. The ground never really settles, not over there. Even now, I flinch when I hear brick scrape against brick in the night. My cousin's house backs up to an old cemetery. Nobody really goes there much anymore. One afternoon I was walking past the stones next to the yard when I noticed something strange. There was a hole in the ground by one of the older headstones. Looked like it was made by a groundhog or some kind of animal. But that wasn't what caught my eye. From the hole, scraps of faded fabric were sticking out. Thin, threadbare pieces, like something old and worn. At first I figured maybe it got tangled up with some old clothing buried down there or trash caught underground. I knelt and pulled one strip gently. The fabric was rough and stiff, like burlap or something from decades ago. An uneasy feeling crept over me. I looked around. The cemetery was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no wind, just a heavy stillness hanging in the air. I heard a faint scratching sound from inside the hole. Not just dirt being moved by an animal, but more deliberate. Like something was trying to claw its way out, I dropped the fabric and stepped back. The scratching got faster for a moment, then stopped altogether. Later, I told my cousin about it. He laughed it off, said it was probably just a critter's nest or old grave liner disturbed by animals. But when I went back the next day, that hole had grown wider. The fabric hanging out looked like someone had been pulling at it from the inside. I wanted to warn him, but every time I think about that hole, I feel something watching, like the ground itself was breathing. The earth, where people have been dead a long time, doesn't want you poking around. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining the hole opening wider, something crawling out, something wrapped in tattered cloth, dragging itself free after years underground. I don't know if it's just an animal or something worse, but any time I'm near that cemetery now, I hear faint sounds, soft scratching, like claws on dirt, and sometimes a cold breeze that smells faintly like old linen and decay. The hole never settles. It's like whatever's down there still remembers how to call out. I was doing my usual rounds late in the afternoon, checking graves and making sure everything looked right. The cemetery was quiet, too quiet. I spotted a group of boys, maybe 3 or 4 of them, standing close together near one of the older headstones. At first, I didn't think much of it. Kids sometimes wander in, exploring or just messing around. As I got closer, something felt wrong. One of the boys was standing apart, his body angled away from the others. But what made my skin crawl was his head. It wasn't facing forward like the others, it was turned completely the other way. I mean, not just a slow turn, but his head was twisted all the way back, looking directly behind him. It didn't make sense, and my mind struggled to process it. I froze for a second, my breath catching in my throat. The rest of the boys were just standing there, silent and still, staring at the same spot in front of them. The boy with the twisted head seemed to be watching, or waiting. I couldn't tell if he was looking at something behind him, or if he was trapped in some kind of unnatural position. I almost wanted to call out, but my voice caught. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding so loud it felt like it was filling the entire space between the headstones. Then, the boy with the twisted head shifted slightly, and in that instant, his eyes met mine. They weren't scared or curious, just empty and dark, like they belonged to someone who didn't want to be seen. My instincts screamed at me to run, but part of me couldn't look away. The other boys didn't blink. They were like statues, no smiles, no movement apart from that one boy's head. I blinked, and suddenly they were gone. Just like that, they vanished into thin air, leaving nothing but silence and the faint rustle of leaves. I didn't tell anyone that night. Something about those boys felt deeply wrong, like a warning or a door left open too wide. Now, every time I walk past that grave, I check twice, but I never see them again. Sometimes in the corner of my eye, I swear I catch a flicker, 4 small shadows near the stones, and a head turned the wrong way, watching. And the feeling never leaves me. My dad was cutting grass in the church cemetery just down the road from our old house. The place was small, old, with graves going back to the 1850s. A creek rock wall circled the church and cemetery, weathered but solid. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of place people only visited on Sundays or Memorial Day. He was working one afternoon, the sun low and warm, when he turned around and saw her, a little girl, sitting still on one of the headstones. She wore a faded dress, something old-fashioned, light and worn from the looks of it. She didn't say anything, just stared straight ahead with empty eyes. Dad froze, his mower idling next to him. For a moment, he thought maybe it was a child from a nearby house. But the place was isolated, the nearest home a good walk away. No one around had kids that age. No one had seen a girl like that in years. He called out softly. No answer. The girl didn't even blink. The wind stirred the loose leaves at her feet, but she didn't move. Something about her felt wrong. The chill in the air, the heavy silence pressing down. That's when his skin crawled and he shut off the mower. Without another word, he packed up and left. He didn't come back for several hours. When he finally did, the girl was gone. No footprints, no signs anyone had been sitting there. The next day, Dad asked around. No one knew anything. Nobody had children nearby who could have walked over. One of the old-timers said the cemetery has been quiet since a girl died there decades ago. They say she never left. Dad never said much after that, but I know he still remembers the way those eyes looked. Empty, but watching. Sometimes, at night, he says he can still see her sitting there in his mind, waiting on a stone, silent as the graveyard itself. And now, whenever he drives past that old creek rock wall, he's quick to look away, like he fears she might be watching from just behind it.